And welcome back.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
You know, we've been having such great conversations around EV and the different angles of it. And I always love to talk to different people that are doing different things, such as what your company's doing, but also because you can look at a 6, where to me it's a 6, but from where you're standing, it's a 9. It's always great to kind of get the different perspective of it. But before I get all your different angles of things, give us a quick, brief overview of what is it that your company does?
Sure. Ideal Power works on power semiconductor devices, and power semiconductors are used to control the flow of energy, change its voltage, change it to whatever form you need it. They're used, a lot in things like electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, but they're also used in things that you use every day. Things like your refrigerator, air conditioning. If you have solar for your home or business, power semiconductors are what take that raw energy and convert it into the form that's needed for the application.
Now, weeks ago, you had collaborated with a third global automaker to explore the integration of its, I believe it was the B-TRAN semiconductor power switch into EVs. Tell me a little bit more about this.
Yeah, it is, as you mentioned, it's our third global automaker. The automakers are really struggling to figure out how do they solve some of the problems, because the EVs are a new platform for all of them. So they need to do things like bring the cost down. They need to improve the range of the electric vehicles so they get more miles out of the batteries. And they need to actually be able to charge them faster. And semiconductors play a big role in all three of those things. This new automaker that we're working with, they're interested in using our technology as part of an EV contactor. And what the contactor does, it provides a safety feature in the event that there is an upset conditions with the battery. It protects the battery and it protects the car itself. And they want to use semiconductors because they can act orders of magnitude faster than the traditional electromechanical contactors that have been used in vehicles for decades.
On the semiconductor side of things, are you having any trouble? Maybe this is old news. I'm not familiar with it, but are you still having any issues in terms of like supply, or is it readily available to how much you need that the demand is being met?
Yeah, the semiconductor supply issues were really on things like processing units. For power semiconductor devices, we haven't had any issues. We use traditional silicon wafers. We use very mature processing facilities to make our device. Our technology itself is new, and how we make the devices is new. But that was really more related to processors that were driving the shortage, and unfortunately impacted the industry pretty broadly.
Now, I know you've had, we talked about the B-TRAN power module. You have also collaborated before with another major OEM as well. What B-TRAN is the industry disruptor solution that you think will benefit automakers, and why?
Our technology, B-TRAN, is really being used in the drivetrain of the electric vehicles. So it could be in the power inverter that's used to take the energy from the batteries and convert it to a form that the electric motor can use. Yeah. It's also being used for circuit protection, things like contactors, because we can really impact all three of those big issues. We can impact the cost relative to more expensive materials like silicon carbide. We can extend the range because our technology improves the efficiency of how that conversion process works. And with some of the changes that are being made in electric vehicles, we can also help them charge more quickly, which is also a big concern for people.
Charging quick. I mean, I mention this all the time. I just mentioned the example before about how it takes people way too long to charge the vehicle, but also to maybe get their place in line to charge the vehicle as well, right? So I think the infrastructure side of things, there's still so much to grow. Like the place where I live, I've got two, condo buildings next to me, 0 charging stations. It's a pretty nice place, but like still nothing. There's no infrastructure there for people to be able to easily charge when they're at home, and then, garages and people who have single family homes or family houses, they may not have the budget or the infrastructure to easily be able to install that there as well. So it does get a little bit tough. You have another product. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's called SymCool. Hopefully I got that right. But tell me a little bit more about this.
Well, if you think about all the renewable energy that's going in, whether it's solar in businesses, wind, if you think about all the charging stations that need to go in, all the energy storage facilities people are putting in to manage their electricity costs, our grid was not designed to accommodate all that. It was designed as a central power plant with a hub and spoke model. So now we're getting all these distributed resources and distributed loads in a system that wasn't designed for it, which means they need circuit protection. They need to be able to isolate from the system if there's a problem. If there's a fault somewhere on the system, you want to protect the equipment so it doesn't get damaged. And that drives the need for solid state circuit breakers, things that can act very fast, but don't create a lot of losses. And that's what our technology really enables. We are really the first power semiconductor device whose conduction losses are so low that you can actually make sense by using a solid state circuit breaker versus an electromechanical device. You end up with something that can act literally orders of magnitude faster than the traditional electromechanical breakers, and have something that's highly controllable, which you really need as we're getting to a more and more intelligent electricity system.
Yeah. Circuit breakers might still give some folks in the chat, including myself, a little bit of a nightmare fear from the 2020 days, depending on how you were positioned in the stock market. But, you know, even they're important. Stock market joke aside, I have an adjustable base, and my friends who have adjustable bases, she literally got one delivered yesterday. And the number one thing I told her was get a surge protector, because you never want something like Mother Nature, lightning, outage in the building, whatever the case may be, to damage your precious investment. For in this case, for her, it was an adjustable base, right? So these things are put in place to be like, all right, minimum damage, control things as an insurance policy so we can regroup and figure out what we need to fix and what we need to do on that side.
Yeah, and when you think about that at an industrial level, when you've got lightning striking somewhere on the grid, you know, everything that is connected to that can see an enormous surge that can damage large industrial motors, all kinds of equipment. You know, think about data centers. I mean, they have a lot of circuit protection because you have to be able to act really quickly if you want to safeguard whatever's connected to that grid.
Yeah, I did a show maybe about 4 years ago in Dallas where we had a brownout. I've heard of a blackout. I never knew where a brownout was, but it was go back to the grid where there was just too much happening. I think the heat in Dallas was too much, whatever the case may have been. And, you know, we just didn't have power for 90% of the building. So we had to adjust. So like those things do happen and you just have to kind of be prepared for it. We talked a lot about like the positives in this space, in the EV space, on this side of things. What are some challenges that you think, not just maybe your company, but just in general, the industry is going to face? And how do you think your company is well set up to deal with those challenges?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges that the industry has is the cost of the vehicles. You know, during COVID, the cost of all types of automobiles increased because of the supply issues. That hasn't really reset yet. That process is starting to happen, but all vehicles are more expensive than they were a few years ago. And electric vehicles in particular are pretty high cost. And that's a barrier to a lot of people because, you know, a lot of the vehicles that are out there, you know, Tesla Model S's and others are not really what the mainstream can afford to buy. So the cost has to come down significantly. And our technology really helps with that because we don't have to use these exotic materials that we see in a lot of electric vehicles. We can actually perform that functionality to control the flow of energy a lot more cost effectively. The other issues are all around charging. You know, it's going to take years for that infrastructure to get built out. You want to get as many miles out of the batteries that you've got, and you want to be able to charge as quickly as possible. And the semiconductors that are used play a big role in improving those things while that infrastructure gets built.
What are your thoughts on, you know, speaking of challenges, I think the biggest one, maybe not in today's future, but maybe in 5-10 years that we're going to start to face is self-driving mode as well, right? I'm asking all my guests this. So what are your thoughts on that? Because, well, let me get your thoughts and I'll give you mine.
Well, I think to some degree, it's been a little overpromised in terms of what the capability really is there. And unfortunately, I think a lot of consumers have really assumed that there's a lot more capability than there is. You know, I think to a large degree, until there's an infrastructure that supports it, whether that's embedded sensors in the road or whether you've got an artificial intelligence system that's got millions and millions of driving hours that it can draw from, it is going to be limited in what it can do. I think it will continue to improve, but I don't think it's going to be what people think of as truly autonomous driving for a lot of years.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I mentioned this with Aaron just before you hopped on, where say, I don't have the exact number of how many Americans die a year from automotive accidents, but say if that number is 1,000, just throwing a number out there for easy math. But say if self-driving gets it down to say 600, that's a great decrease, right? 40% or so. But then as soon as a 601 happens, as soon as we get to maybe 50 deaths that are because of the self-driving, now you've got calls for regulation, more regulation, because I'm sure there will be some. But like that's also the dangerous aspect where it's like, then you have the unfortunate conversation now being maybe philosophical a little bit, but like, hey, the person that passed away because of full self-driving may not have passed away if this wasn't a thing. So even though the numbers decreased, you've changed the game a little bit. And it's a tough conversation to have when
Yeah,
you're talking about the loss of life, no matter who it is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why, I think bringing these systems and their capability out and accumulating just thousands and thousands of hours to really test where the limits are and what they can and can't do are going to be really important in people's acceptance of it. And if you really want to avoid there being a perception that it's not ready, because that will really drive people away from adopting it when it is going to continue to mature. But like I say, it's going to take a while.
I've got a question in the chat from Don. By the way, SymCool is a great brand name. What are some names of the companies likely to adopt your new SSCB tech? Now, I will go ahead and say this. You're a publicly traded company. Some things you may or may not be able to answer. So I want to give you that pretext. But are you able to provide any insights here today on this from our viewer at all?
Well, unfortunately, the companies we're working with, we're working under an NDA. So they haven't shared with us what they're thinking about calling any of their solid state circuit breaker products. Everybody looks to how they differentiate it, and hopefully our name will start to show up in some fashion, whether it's like empowered by SymCool or some other way that gives us a direct nod, because it'll just help stimulate others to do the same thing.
Before I let you go, Dan, any other thoughts, any other point of views that you wanted our viewers to know about before I let you go?
Yeah, keep an eye on our website, because we announce the things that we're doing commercially. We're starting to get to the point where we can start to name some companies. Like we named Stellantis. They actually named us first. We were one of their venture finalists. Nice. And as we get further with some of these companies, we hope to name them because people are going to recognize the names of companies that we're working with.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time here today, Dan. I look forward to more of these conversations as you achieve these partnerships and milestones.
All right. Thanks. It's great to be here.
You got it. That is my man, Dan, who's a president and CEO of Ideal Power. Ticker on the NASDAQ is IPWR.